There's a moment in every person's life when they realize they've been living inside something. Not just a family, not just a culture, but a system, invisible, efficient, and absolutely certain that it knows what's best for you. It starts the moment you're born. You cry, and someone writes your name into a database. You take your first steps, and someone hands you a uniform. You start to think, and someone gives you a curriculum. You grow up thinking, this is normal. That the lines on the floor are there for safety. That the rules on the wall are there for fairness. That the schedule you live by is the only way to live. The system teaches you everything, except how to question it. You're told to sit still when your body wants to move, told to memorize when your mind wants to explore, told to compete when your heart wants to connect. By the time you're 18, the voice in your head isn't yours anymore. It's the voice of the system. Get good grades. Get a job. Get a house. Get married. Don't fail. The system never says, be free. It says, be useful. And it rewards obedience with comfort. You get good grades. You get praise. You get the job. You get stability. You follow the rules. You get peace of mind. But it's a peace that comes with a leash. The kind of peace that's only there as long as you behave. The system thrives on predictability. It needs everyone to walk in straight lines, because chaos terrifies it.
Ooh.
Chaos means unpredictability. Unpredictability means individuality. And individuality can't be controlled. So it convinces you that being different is dangerous, that not following the plan is reckless, that wanting freedom is childish. It disguises conformity as success, mediocrity as stability, and fear as responsibility. You see it everywhere, in classrooms, offices, politics, even religion. The system doesn't care which side you're on, as long as you keep playing the game. But here's the secret. The system isn't evil. It's scared. It was created to protect people from chaos, from the unknown, from risk, from pain. The system believes it's saving you, but in doing so, it's killing something sacred. Your ability to think, act, and create freely. That's why the self begins to rebel. The self is not born inside the system. It's born the moment you notice the walls. It's the quiet whisper that says, there's more than this. It's the discomfort you feel when you do everything right and still feel empty. It's the subtle anger that arises when you realize your dreams were traded for security. The self doesn't want safety, it wants authenticity. It doesn't want comfort, it wants meaning. And meaning always requires risk. That's why most people bury their self. They drown it in distractions, numb it with entertainment, silence it with routine. Because if the self truly wakes up, it becomes impossible to live the same way again. Every system fears town. It's like it's free to live. Every system fears the awakened self. Every empire, every government, every institution, they all know what happens when too many people begin to think freely. The system begins to crack. And when it cracks, it will do everything in its power to hold you in place. It will tell you you're selfish for wanting something different, that you're naive for questioning authority, that you're arrogant for believing your path could be better. It will weaponize your guilt. It will whisper that your rebellion hurts others, that leaving the system means betraying your parents, your teachers, your country. But this is how the self is tested. It's not about destroying the system. It's about transcending it. The system says, play the game. The self asks, who made the rules? The system says, you'll be happy when you achieve. The self whispers, happiness is not in achievement, it's in alignment. The system says, fit in. The self replies, I was never meant to. And yet, most people will never escape the system, not because it's too strong, but because they're too comfortable. It's easy to complain about control when your stomach is full and your screen is bright. It's harder to walk into the unknown, to build your own structure, your own truth, your own rhythm. Freedom is not a door you walk through. It's a wall you tear down, one brick at a time. The system doesn't collapse in one grand act of rebellion. It dissolves slowly. As you stop obeying its invisible rules, when you stop needing approval, when you stop measuring yourself against others, when you stop trading authenticity for belonging, that's when you start to see not just what the system is, but who you are without it. When the system realized that control through force no longer worked, it discovered something far more powerful: control through thought. You can chain a person's body, but that only lasts so long. To truly own someone, you must convince them that the cage is their home. That's what mental conditioning is. Not the destruction of freedom, but the illusion that you never had any. From childhood, you are programmed. Not by a villain behind a curtain, but by a culture that rewards obedience and punishes curiosity. The conditioning is elegant. You are taught what to value. You are told what success looks like. You are shown who to admire and who to avoid. And soon, you don't even need rules, because you've become your own warden. You wake up in the morning, and the voice in your head says, "You're behind. Work harder. Don't fall behind the others." But whose voice is that, really? Yours? Or the echoes of a system that trained you to equate self-worth with productivity? The system doesn't need to monitor you anymore. It's already inside you. It has turned your mind into a surveillance device. Every thought, every doubt, every fear, carefully calibrated to keep you in line. Look closer. Why do you check your phone the moment you wake up? Why do you feel anxious when you're not busy? Why do you feel guilty for resting? Because rest, in the language of the system, is rebellion. Stillness threatens productivity. Silence exposes emptiness, and emptiness invites awareness. Awareness is dangerous. It's the beginning of awakening. That's why the system fills every silence with noise. Music, headlines, opinions, trends, an endless stream of distraction to keep your mind from hearing itself. Because if you ever paused long enough to listen, you might remember who you are. The system understands human nature better than most humans do. It knows you crave belonging, so it weaponizes belonging. It gives you tribes, political sides, fan bases, identities, each one carefully designed to make you feel free, while ensuring you never actually are. Because when you define yourself by a group, you stop thinking as an individual. You outsource your beliefs. You surrender your moral compass to the collective. The system loves collectives. They're easier to steer. And then there's desire. The system discovered that controlling desire is easier than controlling behavior. Because if you can shape what people want, you never have to force them to obey. They'll do it willingly. So it manufactures desire. It sells you an identity and sells you the products that promise to fulfill it. It tells you beauty is power, then sells you mirrors. It tells you freedom is wealth, then sells you debt. It tells you love is attention, then sells you validation through screams. And you chase endlessly, never stopping long enough to ask if the thing you're chasing was yours to begin with. This is how the system wins, not by suppressing your freedom, but by distracting you from noticing you've lost it. It fills your schedule so full that you mistake busyness for purpose. It floods your senses so completely that you mistake stimulation for joy. It drowns you in opinions so often that you mistake noise for knowledge. And by the time you realize it, you've become what it wanted all along: predictable. But there's a crack in every program, a moment when the code begins to fail. It happens when you do everything right and still feel empty. When success tastes like dust. When the things that were supposed to make you happy don't. That's when the conditioning begins to break. Because emptiness is not failure. It's the truth leaking through. The self starts to whisper, what if none of this was ever about me? What if I've been trained to live someone else's life? It's a terrifying question, because once you start asking it, you can't stop. You start seeing the patterns. You see how every institution profits from your insecurity, how every brand builds its empire on your self-doubt, how every algorithm learns to predict your next move before you even know what you want. The system isn't human. It's a machine made of human fear. And yet, you are not powerless. Because the same mind that was conditioned can also be reprogrammed. Not with affirmation, not with rebellion, but with awareness. Awareness doesn't fight the system, it exposes it. When you watch your own thoughts, you begin to separate what's yours from what's being given to you. You begin to see that most of your fears aren't real, they're inherited. Inherited from the system, passed down through generations of people who confused safety with meaning. Awareness is the first crack in the matrix. It's the realization that your thoughts are not always your allies. That your inner voice might be a ventriloquist for your conditioning. And the moment you see that, you are no longer asleep. The self doesn't fight the system with violence. It fights with clarity. Because once you see the cage, you don't have to destroy it. You just have to stop believing it's home. Awakening does not begin with a revolution. It begins with a question. Not a loud one. Not shouted from rooftops or posted online. A quiet one. Almost fragile. What if I am not who they said I was? That single question, whispered in the stillness of your own mind, is how the self is born again. At first, awakening feels like confusion, like the ground beneath you has started to shift. The things that once felt certain begin to dissolve. The opinions you once defended suddenly feel hollow. The ambitions you once chased begin to lose their flavor. It's not depression, it's disillusionment. The illusion is dying. And illusions never die quietly. The self awakens when it realizes that the system's promises were conditional. Work hard and you'll be happy. Be good and you'll be loved. Follow the path and you'll find purpose. But one day you do all of that and still feel a void. And in that silence, something ancient begins to stir. You start noticing how much of your life was scripted, how much of your identity was inherited, how much of your purpose was borrowed from other people's expectations. You begin to see that you've been living in reaction, not creation. Reacting to rules, reacting to validation, reacting to fear. And that realization, though painful, is the beginning of freedom. The self is not something you create, it's something you uncover. Like dusting off a sculpture that's been buried for years. Every layer you remove, shame, fear, expectation, conditioning, reveals something more real, more alive, more you. At first, it's overwhelming, because the world you see now is not the one you were trained to see. You start noticing patterns of control in every corner of society, how education breeds conformity, how entertainment numbs consciousness, how ambition disguises fear. It's as if you've been asleep your whole life, and suddenly, the light is too bright. You'll be tempted to run back to the comfort of the system. You'll be tempted to run back to the comfort of the system, to the safety of the crowd, to the predictable rhythm of a controlled life, because awakening is lonely. You start to realize that most people are still asleep, and those who are awake often pretend they're not, because pretending is easier than being misunderstood. The awakened self carries a kind of quiet sadness, not because it's broken, but because it sees what others refuse to see. It's like watching people dance in a burning room, smiling as the fire climbs higher. You want to scream, but you also remember you were once dancing too. So you stay silent for a while. You watch, you observe, and you learn. Because awakening is not about superiority, it's about responsibility. Once you see the illusion, you can't go back to ignorance, but you can choose how to respond. You can become cynical, believing everything is meaningless. Or you can become conscious, understanding that meaning is not found, it's made. The self begins to rebuild, not by rejecting the world, but by reconstructing its relationship to it. It learns to use the system as a tool, not a master. To play the game, but never believe it's real. It learns that the true rebellion is not in escaping society, but in remaining authentic within it. Freedom doesn't mean isolation. It means alignment between who you are and how you live. Slowly, the self begins to remember. It remembers the child who used to dream without fear, the teenager who asked dangerous questions, the curiosity that school once silenced, the creativity that work once buried. These fragments of the forgotten self start to return, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their place. You begin to live not from conditioning, but from consciousness. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What feels true?" And truth is rarely comfortable, because truth demands that you let go of roles, let go of validation, let go of the idea that you must always be achieving something. Truth asks for stillness, and in that stillness, the self begins to breathe again. The awakened self doesn't seek to destroy the system. It simply stops feeding it. It stops participating in the games of envy and comparison. It stops measuring success by money or applause. It stops needing constant stimulation to feel alive. And that withdrawal of energy is the greatest rebellion of all, because the system cannot survive without your attention. It needs your fear. It needs your competition. It needs your endless hunger to be enough. When you no longer give it those things, it loses its power. But awakening also comes with a new kind of responsibility: to live consciously. You can no longer blame the world for your choices. You see now that you are the world, that every thought, every action, every intention ripples through the collective. So you start to walk differently, speak differently, create differently. Not to impress, not to prove, but to express. Because creation, not consumption, is the true language of the awakened self. The world will not understand your transformation. They'll call it arrogance. They'll call it detachment. They'll call it rebellion. But it's none of those things. It's liberation. You are no longer trying to fit into something smaller than you. You've remembered that your worth was never dependent on performance, that your peace was never meant to be outsourced, and that the greatest act of revolution is to live in alignment with your truth in a world that profits from your self-doubt. And the self awakens. The first instinct is to escape, to leave behind the noise, the politics, the endless motion of the world. You crave silence. You crave peace. You crave distance from everything that once felt like a cage. But sooner or later, you realize something deeper. You were never meant to escape the system. You were meant to see through it. Because the world doesn't need more people who've disappeared. It needs people who've returned, awake. The return is the hardest part of awakening. It's easy to wake up on a mountain. It's harder to stay awake in a marketplace. The mountain offers clarity. The marketplace offers noise. But true awareness must survive both. The goal was never to reject the world, but to remember who you are within it. To walk among the systems, the hierarchies, the illusions, and no longer be ruled by them. At first, this return feels strange. You look at the same people, the same routines, the same cities, but something inside you has shifted. You still play the game, but now you know it's a game. You still work, but your work no longer defines you. You still earn, but money is no longer your master. You still interact, but you no longer need validation to feel real. It's as if you've stepped out of the movie while it's still playing. You can see the script, the patterns, the emotional manipulation. And yet, you choose to play your role. Consciously, deliberately, with full awareness that you are not the role itself. This is what freedom truly means. Not isolation, not rebellion, but choice. You can walk into any system, education, business, religion, politics, and remain untouched at your core, because you no longer look for identity in them. You no longer ask them who you are. You bring your own meaning. You bring your own values. You bring your own consciousness. The system didn't change. You did. And that changes everything. Because when an awakened self re-enters the system begins to evolve. Not through confrontation, but through presence. One conscious person in a room changes the entire frequency of that room. Not by preaching, but by being. Awakening was never about escaping the world. It was about remembering that you are part of the mechanism that shapes it. Every conversation, every decision, every act of creation is an opportunity to reprogram reality, to introduce awareness into systems built on autopilot. The self no longer asks, "How do I fight the system?" It asks, "How do I illuminate it?" It begins to see the beauty hidden beneath the structure, the creativity that built the systems in the first place, the intelligence that designed order out of chaos. The problem was never the existence of systems. It was our unconscious relationship with them. The system without awareness becomes tyranny. But the system, infused with consciousness, becomes civilization. So the self returns not as a slave, but as a creator. It brings art where there was routine. It brings empathy where there was transaction. It brings purpose where there was profit. It brings silence where there was noise. It doesn't try to destroy what exists. It transforms it from within. That's what the truly awakened do. They walk among the asleep, not to judge them, but to remind them they can wake up too. You start to realize that awakening is not an endpoint. It's a cycle. You awaken, you detach, you return, you create, and then you awaken again. Each time deeper, clearer, quieter. The self keeps evolving, and with it, so does the world. Because the system is not separate from you. It's an expression of the collective mind. As you awaken individually, you influence it collectively. That's why one truly conscious person can change more than 1,000 asleep ones ever could. Not through force, through frequency. The awakened self no longer fears chaos. It has learned to dance with it. It no longer resists uncertainty. It sees uncertainty as potential. Raw energy, waiting to be shaped by awareness. It no longer clings to perfection. It knows that imperfection is what allows growth, and in this understanding, the self finds peace, not the fragile peace of comfort, but the steady peace of truth. A peace that doesn't depend on external conditions, a peace that can exist in traffic, in conflict, in failure, in loss, because it's no longer borrowed from the system, it's sourced from within. So the self returns to the world, the same world, but with new eyes. It sees systems not as prisons, but as canvases. It sees life not as a competition, but as collaboration. It sees humanity not as broken, but as asleep, and sleep can end. The self moves quietly, creates deliberately, loves deeply. It no longer needs to shout, because truth, when lived fully, is its own kind of sound. And one day, you realize something profound. The system and the self were never enemies. They were mirrors. The system shows you what happens when consciousness forgets itself. The self shows you what happens when consciousness remembers. Together, they form the eternal rhythm of evolution, order and freedom, structure and soul, discipline and discovery. You are both. You always have been. And the purpose was never to destroy one for the other, but to unite them. Because only when the system and the self coexist in harmony does humanity move forward, not controlled, not chaotic, but conscious. The system is not out there. It's in here, in every habit, every belief, every decision. And the self is not some mystical entity waiting to be found. It's the awareness that watches all of it unfold. When the two meet, you transcend both. You stop asking how to escape life and start learning how to live it. Awake, aware, and unafraid. That is freedom. That is mastery. That is what it means to be truly alive.